I was taking a cancer biology class, and the professor kept impressing upon us that plants were quite toxic and actually quite carcinogenic, and they had these natural poisons that they used in order to defend themselves against predation. So they stopped animals and insects from eating them by being poisonous, which makes sense because they're stationary. They can't run away or fight back like an animal can, but all life has a defense against being eaten because most life is trying to eat other life. And I'd already taken botany and biology, already understood this concept, understood that plants and animals were in an evolutionary arms race, that plants were becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals could eat them so they can survive and thrive, and then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants so they could eat that plant and survive and thrive, but other plants could make them very sick or even kill them. In fact, most plants would kill humans. Most plants will kill most animals, even though some animals may be strictly herbivorous. Well, actually, not strictly herbivorous. Even herbivores will opportunistically eat smaller animals all the time. But
Hmm.
the but they can be adapted to specific poisons in certain plants, so they might eat that plant their entire life, but they won't eat other plants because they can get very sick if they eat other plants and could even die eating most plants. So I already knew that, I already understood that concept, but it was very strange putting that into a human context because you're told, oh yeah, plants can be toxic and you have to be careful, and then go home and eat your vegetables are the best things for you. And so you're sort of thinking, well, I guess maybe we're supposed to eat this stuff, even though humans have been apex predators for over 2 million years. That's what I was taught that in second grade, and that's what all the best evidence shows. And so our professor was just reiterating this, but in the context of human health and cancer in particular. And so he was talking about how there were 136 identified carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts at that time. And this is 24 years ago. So presumably, they found more at this point. And mushrooms had over 100 known carcinogens. But then broccoli and lettuce and celery and cabbage and cucumber and all the different fruits and vegetables that you've ever eaten, fruits included, would have 60, 80, or over 100 known carcinogens in them. They're quite abundant. We know from the work of Professor Bruce Ames in the 1980s, published in the 90s, that the amount of naturally occurring toxins in plants outweighed the pesticides we were spraying on them commercially by a factor of 10,000. And that the
Mm.
naturally occurring toxins in the plants, like in mushrooms, were hundreds of times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides that they were spraying on them. In that case of that paper, it was Alard, which is a pesticide or spray that's
Mm.
used. So we understand that the majority of pesticides are naturally occurring in the plant, and they're actually quite harmful. I mean, this is why we don't have to spray pesticides over the forests and rivers and all these sorts of things, because all the different plant life that are around the world, because they make their own poisons, they make their own pesticides. That's just part of nature. And so same goes for our crops, and we're eating these things and we're just ignoring the fact. Now, Ames concluded that, well, since we all know that fruits and vegetables are good for you, and the pesticides aren't nearly as bad as the fruits and vegetables, obviously the pesticides can't be all that bad, but they are actually, because they're designed to be toxic. They're designed to kill animals and insects that are trying to eat them. So I would look at that the other way. But what his data showed was that the plants were, you know, many orders of magnitude more problematic than pesticides. And since pesticides are designed to kill things, you should probably think about that before you eat the plant. So we were very taken aback by this in my cancer biology class. And I remember him just looking at us, and just to sort of let this all sink into us. And we were looking around wildly, just couldn't believe what we were hearing, looking for someone who was in on the joke, and no one was. And we sort of dawned on us, okay, this guy's serious. And I remember we all settled down. And I was thinking in my head that, but vegetables are still good for you, though, right? And he's just been staring at us the whole time, and he just looked at us and he said, "I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you." I was like, great, enough said. Not going to eat any more plants. And so I just said, okay, I'm not going to eat plants. And I just didn't know what the hell else to eat. I was walking around the grocery store. Everything was made out of plants. Everything was made with or by plants or added to it. And so I just walked around until I found some eggs. I said, okay, eggs. Those don't come from plants. Meat doesn't come from plants. And so I just ate eggs and meat for years, for about 5 years. I felt best I've ever felt in my entire life. My athletic performance went through the roof. Um, my energy, my cognition, just how I did in university and everything other aspect of my life, everything just improved dramatically. I just felt amazing. And then I was playing rugby in at a professional level in England, and I sort of started slipping off of it because some of the meat was breaded, and I just thought, well, maybe dose makes the poison. It's not that big of a deal. And what's a big deal? Actually, it made a huge difference. So yeah, the dose makes the poison. Dose is very, very, very small, and people don't recognize that. And certainly people that say dose makes the poison don't recognize that because they don't tell you what that dose is. Okay, well, if dose makes the poison, tell me the dose, right? And they can't tell you that, so they don't know. So you can't trust that. You can't just say dose makes the poison and then not find out what that dose is. And so the dose is very small. And I felt much worse on that. And I didn't put the two together until much later. And at that point, when something slipped in and I made an excuse for that, more excuses will come. And you know, within a year or so, I was probably back to eating mostly meat still, but adding in, some vegetables and things like that, and maybe some bread here and there. But it wasn't anything dramatic. I mean, I never ate junk food. I was never a junk food person.
Hmm.
It's still very clean, very whole foods and things like that I made myself, except the bread. And massive difference, massive decline in my health, as related to where I had been previously. But I was still playing at a very high level. I was still playing at the top levels in the U.S. and North America, and doing really well, and competing for spots on the World Cup team and things like that. So it was, it wasn't that I couldn't get the job done, but it wasn't nearly the same as what it was before. And then about 7 years ago now, I came across Dr. Sean Baker on Joe Rogan. He was talking about how you can get all your nutrients from meat. And at first that sounds crazy, but then I sort of stopped myself and thought, well, hold on a second. I did that for 5 years and I felt amazing. And that's the time I've never felt better in my entire life. So I was like, okay, well, we'll keep listening. And within 5 minutes, I could tell that he was really onto something. And I understood things that could add to that. The cholesterol theory of heart disease, that was just largely nonsense. Even at the time, we knew that fructose was actually quite a problematic substance in causing poor health. And then the whole plants are trying to kill you thing, that these plants are toxic. They're trying to defend themselves, and this can have a deleterious effect on our health. And everything at that point just clicked in that these plants actually did have a bigger impact on our health than we thought. And humans are carnivores, and we're not eating as such. And any animal, like in the zoo and elsewhere, when you start feeding it food that it's not designed to eat, it can get very sick and it can have serious damage to it. And so we are animals that are not eating what we're supposed to eat, and we're getting sick. And those animals in the zoo will get the same things that we get. They'll get lupus, they'll get diabetes, they get cancer, they get osteoarthritis and osteoporosis. And our domesticated pets do as well. Those are the only animals on Earth that get these diseases, are animals that eat outside of their biological design. That's the only ones. And that goes for humans as well. So that made sense. And I said, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And I just tossed them. And I just went back to just eating, very fatty meat and water. Now I understood the fat was healthy. Before been eating pretty lean. And and I felt great. And I felt like I was 38 at the time. I felt like I was, 22 again, and just on top of the world within 2 weeks. I just felt so good that I went back and started playing, professional rugby, and said, yep, gonna do this again. And I've never felt better. And I just started digging into the research and the literature and trying to find out as much as I could about what we knew and what we could prove. And so since then, I've just been trying to share that with others. I've found such a profound effect on myself. I've seen copious amounts of evidence for this in the literature. And when applied to my patient population, I've never seen results like this. And I don't think anybody's ever really seen results on this. Not in recent history. They used to treat these chronic diseases with a red meat and water diet since the 1800s with Dr. Salisbury, and that all the way up until the 1970s. There were people advocating for this. Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia. It's Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. And then that just got completely thrown by the wayside because we said that cholesterol was bad. Saturated fat increases cholesterol. Red meat and meat have all this cholesterol. You just got to stop eating it. Basically, you just have to go vegetarian, or you're going to die of a heart attack. Even though that people have been eating meat since time immemorial, and the heart disease rates and heart attacks only really came up in the 1900s. It really just didn't exist to any real degree before that. Not even in the literature. There's only a few isolated case reports in Europe, and there's none before 1912 in America. So it's very, very uncommon. And if you look at actually the statistics that were kept on longevity, people were living just as long as they are now back in the 1800s and 1700s. It's just that infant mortality rates were high, so that brings the average from birth down. But that doesn't tell you how long people were living if they died of old age. And so there were plenty of people that were dying in their 80s and 90s. No heart disease to speak of, and they were eating far more meat in the 1800s and certainly the early 1800s than we were in the early 1900s when this became the number one killer in America. So there's a lot of flaws in this, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But at the moment, it's just important to understand that meat isn't bad. It isn't harmful. It doesn't cause disease. And in fact, it's eating outside of our natural diet, because we're not herbivores. We are actually carnivores, and we've been carnivores for millions of years. And when you eat outside of that, you actually can get very, very sick, just like all the domesticated pets and the zoo animals. When you feed them the wrong thing, they get the exact same diseases that we get. And so these diseases just go away when you stop eating it, because it's a consequence of eating it incorrectly. So when you start eating correctly, those diseases go away. And so now I have a patient population who have all wanted to try this, and they're reversing diabetes, reversing autoimmunity like Hashimoto's, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, lupus. These are very devastating diseases that can be life-threatening in some cases, and they're actually improving, and they're coming off medication as opposed to going on medication, and so many more, so many other things that are just pretty amazing. And so I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of this and try to get this out to just normal people so they can take back control of their health and their lives. And there's certainly enough people trying to take it away from them. So we definitely need people on that side as well.
Yeah, thank you. That was a big roundup about everything on the carnivore diet. Yeah, and you just recently did a speech and in St. Moritz. This is actually also the reason why I've got the pleasure to have you here as a guest, because Elke Lorenz, she just went on to you to ask you whether you would come into our German podcast. And there, your speech actually had the topic that our athletes don't need any carbs. And this is still also in the German community, probably also in the American community. It is very controversial. The thing is, how intensive does the sport have to be, or can the sport be if you take out all of the carbs? Because some say, well, if we have really intensive sports, then you really need carbs.
Yeah, well, that is what they say, but that's not actually accurate. So it's it isn't that you don't need carbs. You don't need to eat the carbs because you make the carbs yourself. So you make blood sugar and glycogen at exacting levels. You get the perfect amounts of them, because actually when they're too high, it can actually be damaging to your body. I mean, this is called glycation, where these glucose molecules and other carbohydrates can actually physically fuse to other molecules. It's just non-enzymatic fusion between glucose in this case and other molecules, and it physically damages them. It causes advanced glycation end products, AGEs, and this can build up over time, and you get this buildup of damage. And this is exactly what kills diabetics. And this is what makes it so they have to get their toes amputated, and their feet and ankles and legs, and their kidneys start to fail, and their eyesight goes, they get dementia, and they get heart disease, and they die. And so that's all from just having really actually 1 extra gram of glucose in your bloodstream at any given time. It's very little. And yet we're eating hundreds of grams of carbohydrates a day. But if you go just 1 gram too much, you're actually starting to build up this permanent damage. And so that's obviously not ideal. But for our purposes, for just having energy and being an athlete, you make all the glycogen that you need. You make all the blood sugar that you need. And now you're making ketones as well. And in fact, when they looked at, people like Professor Tim Noakes or Dr. Volek, start looking at these things in, controlled trials in human athletes, both recreational athletes and then, high performance world-class athletes, they find it's a very different story. At first, people said that, well, if you're really pushing yourself to that high intensity, like you said, the higher levels of exercise. So when your VO2 max is over 85, this was something that was said for a long time. When your VO2 max is over 85, you can only burn carbohydrates. It's not possible to go through fat oxidation. That's completely incorrect. It's just when you have an abundance of carbohydrates and glycogen in the way, you don't really burn fat. You don't use fat oxidation at those higher levels of VO2 max. However, when you're in the ketogenic group that aren't eating carbohydrates, they'll use some carbs, and the vast majority of their energy is actually fat oxidation even at maximal VO2 max. It doesn't matter. And so, in fact, they found that it had higher output in high intensity work, and they found that they had better glycogen recovery as a keto in a ketogenic athlete that was not eating carbohydrates. The body naturally replenished glycogen stores faster than the carbohydrate groups. This was in Volek's FASTER study in 2016, and they found that they actually recovered the glycogen faster. So they did muscle biopsies in these athletes. That these were top level athletes. They've been on ketogenic diets for over 6 months, and they were like ultra marathoners. And so these were very high level athletes, and they found that before exercise, that the zero carbohydrate group that didn't eat carbohydrates, they actually had just roughly the same glycogen levels, possibly a bit more than the people that were carb loading and trying to store a bunch of glycogen. And then directly after the workout, the zero carb group, the ketogenic group, actually had a bit more glycogen. So actually recovered their glycogen a bit faster and maintained it at a better level than the carbohydrate group, who were eating a bunch of sugar gels and things like that. And it wasn't for 3 hours later until the carbohydrate group caught up with the zero carb group, and they were again roughly the same. And so you make glycogen perfectly fine. In fact, your body prefers to run on fat oxidation because that's our main fuel source. When we think about how much energy is available to you as an athlete or just as a person, and you're looking at different fuel storage forms such as glycogen or fat, you can store far more energy as fat than you can as glycogen. Glycogen is not a very efficient way of storing energy compared to fat. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, Check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. And while your body has a limited capacity to absorb or to store glycogen, almost a near unlimited capacity to store fat. People get very, very obese, for instance. You can't do that with glycogen, but even for slender people. So this was calculated previously, where if you have a 65 kilo top athlete who has 6% body fat, very lean, that person would have 150,000 kilocalories of energy available to them in their fat stores. Whereas you could only get around, 10, 15,000 kilocalories of glycogen stored in your liver and your muscles if you were maximally, you had maximally
Filled up.
stored glycogen, right? So when you're in a carbohydrate fueled state, you have to keep running on those carbohydrates, and obviously you have 1/10 of the available energy for a very lean person. You have 1/10 of the energy available to you, and once that's gone, you can't replenish it with your fat stores, because when your insulin is up, your ability to mobilize energy from your fat stores goes down, and so you can't actually maintain your blood sugar and your glycogen that way. You feel you hit the wall, you crash, your energy levels go away, or you bonk. There's all these different terms for it. But what it is you run out of glycogen, you run out of blood sugar, and you just hit, you face plant, and you just feel horrible. Whereas in a ketogenic athlete, you're never going to run out. You're just going to keep going and going and going. So you have a better access to this machinery. So now you have the exact same capacity to run glucose and glycogen that you make. So you not have any reduction in performance. And they've actually tested this in randomized controlled crossover trials in athletes. With Noakes, and Volek has done these things as well. But specifically with Noakes, he did these crossover trials where they said, okay, we have the ketogenic athletes and we have the carb athletes, and say, okay, how can we really run the hell out of them and see how they do? Okay, they can have the same output, but then the ketogenic athletes just have this access to more energy, so they can just keep going and going and going, right? Whereas the other guys are sucking down sugar water and all this sort of stuff, and then still it's not even as beneficial, and they can't replenish their glycogen as quickly. And then they did a crossover. Say, okay, so you're going to go for you're going to fat adapt. You're going to be on a ketogenic diet for 42 days, do all of our tests, and then you're going to switch. And so the people that were eating carbs are now not eating carbs, and people who are not eating carbs do eat carbs, and do that for another 42 days. Had a bit of a washout period, 42 days. And so I gave them enough time to get to the other side of this. And then there you go. And they tried it again. And again, their athletic performance didn't drop in the ketogenic group. They were able to perform just as hard and just as long. And now they're actually able to perform longer because they had access to their fat stores. And so it is, we have a growing body of information now in sports medicine and sports science, showing that keto adapted athletes are at the very least not at any sort of disadvantage to carb fueled athletes, and in fact have several advantages as well. Chris Froome, he was a 4-time winner of the Tour de France, and he does a ketogenic diet. Erling Haaland is one of the top strikers in Europe and possibly the world, and he's been doing ketogenic carnivore diets as well. And the list goes on. There's just so many people, so many of the top athletes around the world have been doing this and getting massive advantages by doing so.
Yeah. Well, I thought it's interesting what you said about the cartilage that becomes destroyed by these HEEs, because I mean, this is a pandemic, what we've got with people in my